He came home that Christmas that I was teaching school, living in Brownsville, and he came home that Christmas, and he wanted to get married because he said, well, we'll never see each other again. And I said, okay, under those conditions. So we got married in March, and then he went overseas in October, and I had learned to fly at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, where we both graduated under one of Franklin D. Roosevelt's old programs.
The German army was superbly trained and motivated, and had superior weapons to ours. Their tanks could shoot a hole in ours with no trouble, and ours would just bounce off of theirs. So they had a big advantage there. We were using old World War I 30 caliber water-cooled machine guns that put up a cloud of smoke when you fired them. It looked like a bonfire. And they had machine pistols and machine guns with smokeless powder that didn't get a bit of smoke, and the rate of fire was perhaps twice what ours was. Ours would go poop, 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 and they'd go prrrr. That was the difference in there. They had good material. They had the 88 millimeter gun was the outstanding gun of the war. It was an anti-tank gun. It was an anti-aircraft gun. It was an artillery piece. We never matched the 88. They had really prepared, and they were just professionals at it.
On this edition of West Tennessee Journal, we conclude our visit with 4 West Tennessee veterans of World War II.
To make an amphibious landing, when you're bobbing around in a little boat out there, it doesn't make much difference whether you experience it or not. So they made the landing with the new divisions, with green divisions, and they kept the 1st and the 9th to exploit whoever got ashore. So we went in at D+4, behind the 4th and the 9th Division on Utah Beach. They had landed and gone just a very short way. I'd estimate not much more than a quarter, maybe a half a mile. And they were bogged down and taking casualties like nobody's business. And we landed behind them, and we were sharp as a tack because we had been through North Africa and through Sicily, and then we had from about 6 months in England to train and so forth, and really, so we were pretty sharp. And we passed through them, and we went through the Germans like a dose of salt. And in a little over a week, we had cut the whole Cotentin Peninsula, the Cherbourg Peninsula, and came out on the far side over at Barnable. We were moving up in a road in Sicily there, and on a column, we were in a column just a column on each side of the road, and I was at the head of one column, and Pardue was right across from me at the head of the other column. And we were moving up toward Randazzo in Sicily there, and an 88 shell came in, and you could tell by the sound of it, it was going to hit out there maybe 75, 100 yards out in the field there. It wasn't going to hit right on us. So nobody paid much attention to it, but I heard all this rattle, you know, and I looked around there, and here's Pardue's helmet and rifle. He dived in the ditch. He'd never heard one before. Well, that was so embarrassing to him. From then on, you could have pointed a 88 right down his throat and he wouldn't have flinched. He became one of the really outstanding officers in the company and was just excellent, but he was killed in Normandy.
People was the main thing, the biggest thing, I guess. Men and women. Because there was some of them got killed too. Oh, I lost my brother. He was about 2 years younger than me. But I never thought all that kind of stuff about it, really. I just lived my life one day at a time, did what I could and tried to do what I did, I tried to do as well as I could, and that was it.
You made close friends. There's just no closer friends than you ever developed than you did in combat with people. But the terrible part was when you had real close friends and they were killed, generally there were so many urgent things to do and take care of at the moment that you never even had a moment to grieve about it. You just went right on. So we lost a lot of good friends that way.
Two of my best friends, they did not change the T setting. And so one was taken off and one was coming in. And they had a head-on collision and killed them both. And one of the hardest things we did was going out and identifying Mary and having her, we had to escort her back home to her parents. That was a heartbreaker. Mrs. Deaton ran the school. And we thought she was the worst woman in the world because she made us get up and carry out the routine the next morning after that accident. And we all thought we ought to stay at home and cry and whine. And she had us back on the flight line the next morning. So that was hard.
I was a platoon leader when we landed, and my company commander was killed down at El Guitar, in the edge of the Sahara Desert down there in the southern part of Tunisia. And then I commanded the company through the rest of the Tunisian campaign and the Sicilian campaign.
I learned a little bit later that a friend that I went to school with over here at Cydonia, his name was Freeman. He wasn't with alphabetically, he wouldn't have been with the S's. On the 24th, we had a pretty rough day, and I learned later his parents had got to notice that he got killed, and they in turn, they knew that he and I were together, his parents did, so they got in touch with my mother and my wife, and they then, for some reason, my mail had stopped, which they thought the worst. I'm not getting any mail. And it was a few days before I got it cleared up. He was over there 1 month from the day he left the States before he got killed.
While we were we'd play poker. None of us had any money, hadn't been paid in months, so it was all on the cuff. And money don't mean much to you under those circumstances, particularly if it's just on the cuff, you know. And so we had some pretty big pots. And then when we moved out from there, we enjoyed that, and we had a good time playing poker, you know. But when we moved out from there, of course, several of the players in the game were killed. And after the war, some of them come and said, "Do you know Joe's address? He owes me 15,000 francs." I never told anybody the address that I knew because, you know, you couldn't even up because several of them were dead. Most of them were dead.
A couple of us walked around and we came upon this morgue. And so we decided that we'd find out if this Regalado was there. He was Mexican. He was a likable fella. But we went to this place, it was a morgue. It was about the size, I'd say it was half as big as this room. Now this is 15 feet long, and I mean 5 and 30 feet long. But it was half of this. It was stacked up to here in bodies. When they found them, they would check their dog tags and fill out a tag. They'd take their boots off and they'd tie the tag to a toe. And we began to look and we found Regalado's tag on his toe. And that was enough. We went on back, but you don't ever get used to it.
Martha McKenzie, who lives down at Memphis, she had to make a forced landing. And so she did. She found her, her engine quit and she had to make a forced landing. So she landed in this field and got out, and she saw a farmer's house. And so she started going toward that house. And the old bull started after her that was in the field. She didn't see the old bull when she went down. And so here came this old bull, and Martha did not know she could run as fast as she did. She got over that fence and all and up to that house.
My best man and I checked out an old BT-13 trainer plane and flew from Maxwell Field to the base up here at Halls. The day before I got married, we had our rehearsal that night and had the wedding the next day. And he flew the plane back to Maxwell, and Sue and I, they carried us to the Peabody that night. And the next day we caught a train out of Memphis and rode back to Montgomery on that and carried her to the room. I reported back to the base, back to duty.
And there we are. We were learning to march. We had the damnedest time learning how to march. This is Pat Ballou right back here. That's Ann Yu from Pat Ballou. Pat Ballou was double jointed, or at least that's what they said, and she never did quite get in step. She never was out of step, but she never was quite in step. Do you understand what I mean? And so we all had a terrible time getting Pat to march and stay in step with us, because our nickname for Pat was Swivel Hips, because when we'd march, her hips being double jointed was swivel.
We went out on patrol a lot, and the way we'd travel on that is you would get a hold of the man in front of you, his cartridge belt, and it'd hook up just like a train, and we'd have the squad leader up in front, and we'd follow around. And one night we went on patrol, and we was in a wooded area. We decided that we wanted to rest a little bit. So we all sat down. It was real quiet. Finally, we just whispered, and it started whispering about, let's hook up, hook up. Well, we hooked up, took off. We got in, we was a man short. What in the world? Well, he went to sleep. And when he woke up, he was by himself. We'd already left him because they'd hooked up, and every man hooked up, and they just grabbed a cartridge belt, and that's what it was.
They got lost. And you go up there and you're 7,000 feet and you're practicing. You're so concentrated on concentrating on what you're learning to do, and like if you're doing pylon 8, you've got to keep that ring right on that point. And she got up there and she got lost, and she couldn't find her way back to the field, back to the base, and she did not know what she was going to do. And another steerman came into sight about that, and she could tell it was a girl flying it. So she said, "Save, thank you, Lord." So she started following this other steerman. And it was a graduate delivering a plane. And she ended up all the way in El Paso or somewhere.
Bob Hope and his troupe of entertainers, Armed Forces Radio, and Hollywood all worked hard to keep the soldiers' spirits up and bring them a little slice of home. What they delivered was a reflection of change.
I think the war changed my whole generation. It changed our lives completely, totally. If it hadn't been for the war, our lives would have been entirely different from what they were. Before that, we had been Southerners or Yankees or Westerners, but we were more unified because of the war. And I think that made us one nation.
The lifestyle was changed greatly with civilians as much as it was with us, because you had money, you couldn't buy sugar, you couldn't buy gasoline, you couldn't buy meats at times, because it was rationed. And you had those little ration books, and those coupons would, at times, meant more to you than the money did, because most people were working, and that's when women went to work too.
There was more change among women. In the 20s, women changed a lot from World War I, but they changed even more in World War II. Of course, back in World War I, for the first time they cut their hair. For the first time they shortened their dresses. For the first time they wore lipstick and makeup. So there was a lot of change had been going on because of World War I. And then when World War II came along, the door was cracked a little bit for women to do jobs they had never done before. Rosie the Riveter, and they just got into all sorts of occupations. The sad thing about it was there was what I read in the paper is called post-traumatic stress disorder. Mm-hmm. And I think we had, after the war was over, I think women had I think they suffered from that because they had been, like I, flying airplanes or driving trains or doing all these things. And then after the war, suddenly the whole climate changed toward women immediately after the war. Whereas when they were recruiting, trying to get women to come in, it was honey do this, honey do that. And after the war, they were kicked out.
If a man was a 4F, he really was. He was disabled.
I was not a Christian at the time I went into the war. But the day I crawled out of that foxhole, when that shell went into it, I changed my mind. That, I guess, is the biggest thing that happened to me. That it brought me to understand a little bit more about the Bible and to become a Christian. That was the greatest thing, I guess, that happened to me. I've tried to live a Christian life ever since. On the 8th day of May, we got word that the Germans had sent out a message that all resistance should cease. In other words, they were surrendering. Well, we were playing softball. It got that way. And as this message went about, we thought we had found all the Germans there were. But they came out of the woodwork, so there was Germans everywhere. And they were just boys, most of them were boys. But they came out surrendering, and there was so many of them, and they surrendered so fast that they had to stretch up American wire fence and make a compound to put them in. And they'd come back and lay the rifles down, and they was just, of course, as I said, boys, they was just so proud to give up. They'd had enough. They just didn't want any more.
I got off the train in Lincoln, Nebraska, on my way for overseas processing, and I got off the train there, and that was the wildest town you ever saw. Horns were blowing, bells were ringing, the streets were full of people yelling, the war's over, and just about every dude you met had a fifth in each hand trying to get you to take a drink and all that kind of stuff. I mean, everybody was celebrating.
When the war ended, the Americans were left in a predicament. There was that had foxholes full of men. They've been living in foxholes, eating K rations, C rations. Now, what are we going to do with these? We take them out of the foxholes, where are we going to put them? So they started looking for what they call billeting places, buildings that would be good for housing. Well, the Germans had made some places like housing projects. They were built in rows. And then they discovered German barracks in Frankfurt, Germany, German barracks. And then they had what they call the IG Farben building, was where Eisenhower put his offices there, his command in Frankfurt, Germany.
I have a great admiration for the infantrymen in World War II and World War II. One just died. One of the last just died. Clarence Martin just a few weeks ago died. He went through the whole war in Company I as a rifleman. And what they put up with in the way of going without food, going without water, going without blankets, in the snow and the rain and the heat, and marching for long distances with a heavy load. My admiration for them is just beyond description almost, what they went through.
They fixed some sandwiches for us. They really wasn't expecting us. So we had a little sandwich. So the next morning when we went in for breakfast, the old mess sergeant stopped everybody. And he told them, says, now I've got 8 men here that's been living in foxholes and eating K rations, and said, I want them right here in front, and you can have anything in here you want. I like fried eggs. So I got in the line there and they gave me 2 fried eggs. I had 8 that morning. I had 8.
At the end of the war, and you probably have noticed it, most of us came back home, and you probably, and we just kind of put it on the back burner back there. It was all over with. And until the 50th anniversary, it never was much said about the war anywhere. It was just over with. And then they started celebrating the 50th anniversary, and that just stirred everything up again. And it came back on the front burner, it seems, and everybody wanted to talk about it and look up old records. And I went and looked up stuff that had been lying on the closet shelf for 50 years or so, and that sort of thing.
Now this is not a German weapon. This is a Czechoslovakian weapon. And they told us that while we were finding these, that Germany had run out of weapons. And they were taken, of course they were in Czechoslovakia and all those places over there. And this is one of the Czechoslovakian rifles, and they took it and they armed their boys with it.
Well, I just never thought of myself that way. And I don't even today. I mean, and there were so many that didn't come back that really had a greater claim to be a hero than I did.
There was a German man, he was a soldier. He was in the artillery, and he had been wounded earlier in the war, and it had damaged his leg, and they still wasn't sure whether it's going to save it or not. but he was a professional photographer. He had a photo shop of his own when it wasn't before the war. And he was there. Well, he started teaching me, telling me, showing me how to do this and that. And it really got interested, and I got interested in it. And it's strange how you could think that at one time he might have been considered the enemy, but now he's a friend.
Well, it was over with. We thought it was. It was over with. It's part of my life. I'm 3 years older than I was when I went in, so it's time for me to settle down. I'm a married man now. I got to start making a living for a family. In fact, when I got home, about 2 weeks, my daughter was born. After I was sweating, I didn't know what I was going to get home for, she was born or not, but I made it. And of course, I was there to help from the time she came home from the hospital.
My greatest regret as I look back on it was that I wasn't as skillful in the use of my supporting weapons as I should have been. If I had made a little better use, I used them, and I don't mean I didn't use them at all, but I could have done a better job of my support weapons, you know, and maybe saved a few more lives.
If I had it to do again, I'd go again.
What I learned in the war, I never used as far as what I was doing. Now I learned discipline, learned punctuality, the things that helped you in a later life. It helped me. I have no regrets.
If that gun could talk, it would tell a lot of history.